It shouldn't come as a surprise that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is teeming with secrets. There wasn't a corner in the game where I couldn't find an Easter egg or a hidden reference. That's why today we're diving into as many of them as I could find or figure out. Before we jump in, rest assured that this video contains no spoilers for the main story. And hey, if you spot anything I got wrong or have additional insights, feel free to call me out in the comments below. Let's begin with pop culture references that made it into the game. If you're a fan of the 1975 film Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you'll pick up on several references scattered throughout the game. For instance, when Henry and Hans first arrive at Trotsky Castle, the whole scene with the guards seems heavily inspired from the movie. Additionally, in the dice minigame, you'll come across a die called the St. Antiochus die. With the description, the St. Antiochus die always rolls a 3, not 2, and especially not 4. This is a subtle reference to the movie's King Arthur and his epic struggle with counting to 3.
1, 2, 5! Lisa! 3!
Another connection to the movie can be found in the main level up icon, which resembles the Antiochus Holy Hand grenade from Monty Python. And if Henry happens to get injured, he will sometimes respond with,
"'Tis but a scratch."
Another reference to the film.
A scratch?
You might have noticed a large grave in the northern corner of the Sedlet Cemetery, marked by a small circle of stones and a large cross adorned with a flower wreath. Buried beneath it lies a long-forgotten secret. As you enter the lower part of the Sedlet's monastery, you'll uncover the remains of people who died in a deadly plague during the reign of King Charles. At that time, the wealthy and noble locked themselves in the town hall, hoping to wait out the deadly virus that was wiping out the poor. They were untouched by the disease and carried on with their worldly engagements, only for fate to strike back. During one of their feasts, a deadly contagion broke out and ravaged their bodies. The guards refused to let them out, fearing that doing so would condemn the poor outside to the same fate. In the end, their remains and belongings were buried beneath that cross, serving as a chilling reminder of their arrogance. Apart from movie references, the legend of King Arthur also makes an appearance in the game. At this specific location on the map, you can actually find Excalibur embedded in a stone, and yes, you can pull it out. Whether it grants you the power of a true king or just serves as a cool Easter egg is something that remains to be seen. During a side quest in the game, when Henry is asked which nickname he would prefer, the options include a subtle reference to The Witcher. As one of the choices is a nod to Geralt, who is famously known as the Butcher of Blaviken.
The Butcher of Vranik.
Well, that's not very creative.
At one point in the game, the bailiff will assign you a task to catch a thief stealing cabbages from the town. And as you're wandering through the forest, you'll stumble upon a trail of cabbages leading you on a little scavenger hunt. Follow the trail and you'll eventually find a cave where you catch the infamous Cabbage Man. You can either turn him in for a nice 700 groschen, or let him whip up a cabbage delicacy just for you. This dish will not only satisfy your hunger, but also gives you a +1 boost to vitality. And I think this could be a reference to the cabbage merchant from Avatar: The Last Airbender. This next secret might be a bit heavy for some, so just a heads up. In the same cemetery, you'll come across a grave that's filled with toys and oddly small remains, with a skull you can loot. If you take the skull to the Gravedigger nearby, he'll tell you a heartbreaking story about a child who accidentally fell into a stream, and the mother, unable to cope with the loss, passed away soon after. The mother, though, was buried beneath the Kuttenberg walls, far away from her child. You'll have the chance to recover her skull and reunite them by placing both mother and child together in their final resting place. Speaking of the Gravedigger who shared the tragic story about the child, it turns out he's battling some demons of his own. If you manage to sneak past him and enter his house undetected, you'll find a chest above his room that contains some very peculiar items. If you read their descriptions, you'll find out they have some very special boner effects. I mean, bonus effects as well. While staying at the Zhelihov Tavern, you might run into two friends, George and Michael, who share a passion for music. They'll send you on a quest to fetch them a musical instrument, and if you're paying attention, you'll quickly notice that their names are a clever nod to the famous pop icon George Michael. And if you change the game's language, the reference switches to a famous singer from that region. For example, in German, their names are Udo and Jürgen, referencing the popular German singer Udo Jürgens. Complete their quest, and these two music enthusiasts will compose a song about you. It's a fun Easter egg for fans of 80s music.
Henry, our hero Henry, the fellow who helps his fellow man.
And while we are on the subject of parading Henry, there's this strange lady you might bump into while fast traveling. She doesn't have a name, but she's always following you around mysteriously. If you happen to talk to her, she'll recognize Henry and even mention that she's been with him through many times. like back in Skeletons.
What kind of work do you do?
I assist people, sometimes with their pain, their suffering, their hatred. It varies from one soul to the next. We have seen each other many times. Why have you left it until now to stop by?
I don't remember seeing you before.
Really? I have always been with you whenever you... Well, never mind. Good luck, Henry of Skalitz.
You know my name?
And if you're curious enough to peek into the game files, you'll find out her name is labeled as Death. You can encounter another NPC while fast traveling, and this one's a lot less creepy. And one of the dialogue options lets Henry make a reference to an iconic video game franchise.
Now, I heard of a bloke who took an arrow to the knee.
And you guessed it. This is a popular line from Skyrim. Back in Sedlet's monastery, hidden behind a bush, you'll find a sword sticking out of a campfire. This scene will likely remind some players of the bonfires from Dark Souls, which serve as checkpoints where players can rest and create new spawn points. The horse trader in Grund has a very special steed in her farm. This little gem is a nod to Bill, the very same pony that accompanied Sam during the early adventures of the Fellowship of the Ring right up until they reached Moria.
These 4 old fellas left him here. They were travelling God knows where, and Bill was carrying all sorts of packs on his back. They were these little fellas who went barefoot, and they were looking for an inn. I reckon they sold poor Bill so they could buy a hot dinner. I mean, they couldn't even afford shoes.
A neat reference for all Lord of the Rings fans playing the game. In the forest south of Kuttenberg, you'll come across a straw hat with a red ribbon. This is a subtle reference to a pivotal moment in the One Piece anime, where the main protagonist, Luffy, leaves his straw hat on a rock to begin his hockey training, which leads to a 2-year time jump. The item description reads that it seems to carry with it the will of those who wore it before me. A clever reference One Piece fans will certainly recognize. And it also weighs more than any armor piece in the game. Under the Sedlet's monastery, amidst a sea of bones and skulls, you'll discover a strange delicacy called fried snow, an item you won't find from any regular merchant. This is a nod to Undertale, where a skeleton sells this to the player for at least 50,000 gold. Its steep price is for its sentimental worth than its actual use. In the Kuttenberg Tournament, your opponents aren't just random knights, they're actually counterparts of famous pop culture characters. Take Willem the Thatcher, for example. He's clearly inspired from a 2001 movie called A Knight's Tale, where the late Heath Ledger's character, William Thatcher, also competes in a tournament, though under much different circumstances. Then we have Johann Silverfist, an obvious nod to Johnny Silverhand from Cyberpunk 2077.
I hear he's not quite right in the head on account of the time spent in the dark underground, but still a living legend.
And let's not forget Matthew the Minter, who bears a striking resemblance to Matt Damon's character in The Last Duel, right down to the goatee and medieval armor. But that's just a few of them. Have you spotted any other familiar faces in the tournament? Let me know in the comments below. Hidden along the walls of Kuttenberg behind a lush green bush, you'll find a cat with a sword in its mouth and big boots on its hind legs, a possible nod to Puss in Boots. There's another quirky figure in the game. An egg dressed as a cowboy, which is a reference to a Slovak fairy tale known as An Egg Went Wandering. Just outside Trotsky Castle, you'll find another pair of boots, but these will be upside down in a haystack, an obvious nod to the iconic leap of faith from the Assassin's Creed franchise. But this time, it seems the Brotherhood didn't quite stick the landing. The Perks menu is also packed with several references, whether it's Gladiator, Sandman, Beowulf, or the Green Knight. Fun fact, this Green Knight is not from a movie, but from a 14th century chivalric romance called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Moving on, the Perk One Shot at Glory seems to be a nod to the ending song from Painkiller by Judas Priest, an English heavy metal band. Meanwhile, Ordinary Man might be a reference to Ozzy Osbourne's 12th studio album and the song with the same name. The devs have also sneaked in a few references through item descriptions, one of which is a Lord of the Rings reference in the description for a torch. May it be a light for you when all other lights go out. And if you manage to get your hands on Sigismund's sausage, the description includes a hilarious nod to, well, his endowment. You can also find references in your achievements, for example, Rock and Stone, which is a popular phrase from a game featuring badass space dwarves called Deep Rock Galactic.
Rock and Stone!
The achievement description references Carl, who is an unseen character in the game but deeply loved by the community. The Hal Shot First perk is possibly a reference to the famous debate among Star Wars fans about a scene in A New Hope, where Han Solo shoots Greedo. In the original version, Han shoots first, but the scene was later edited, sparking a long-running argument about whether Han is a cold-blooded killer or was simply acting in self-defense. This perk is a playful nod to that ongoing debate. One fun Easter egg in the game is the Potion Seller perk, where both the name and description reference a viral comedy skit by Justin Kuritsky's.
You cannot handle my potions.
In the skit, a knight attempts to convince the potion seller to sell him his strongest potions, hoping they'll give him an edge in an upcoming battle. There's also a skeleton with an oddly small skull that can be found somewhere between Troskowitz and Jelihov. This could very well be a reference to the shrunken head guy from the 1988 movie Beetlejuice. Other dialogue references in the game include
"Not great, not terrible,"
which is straight out of HBO's Chernobyl.
"Not great, not terrible."
And of course,
What? War never changes.
a line that's famously narrated during the opening of every Fallout game.
It's the war. War never changes.
When I said there's an Easter egg in every corner of the game, I meant it. On the western edge of the map, you'll come across an isolated shack in the middle of the woods, but there is more to it than meets the eye. You will find sausages suspended from a tree and a dead man's body inside a white foamy barrel. His belongings can be found inside, a straw hat resting on what appears to be a scythe. This entire scene is filled with references to Dařbuján a Pandrhola, a classic Czech folktale and film about a poor miner named Dařbuján who gains the power to heal, and a wealthy, greedy brewer named Pandrhola who eventually needs Dařbuján's help when he falls ill. The story delves into themes of social justice and the consequences of greed. Now let's take a look at some popular references to Czech culture. If you still haven't made it to the wedding and found this reference, well, then that's on you. There is an NPC who mistakes you for someone called Bušek and offers you wine. Henry then comments on how the vine tastes disgusting. This is a reference to a Czech poem known as The Ballad of Charles IV by Jan Neruda. The poem depicts King Charles and his advisor Bušek tasting wine made from Czech grapes, with the king initially criticizing it for its poor quality. His frustration extends to the land and its people, whom he finds stubborn and unyielding. However, as he continues drinking, he begins to appreciate the wine's unique qualities, recognizing that both the land and its people have value despite their imperfections. Now, speaking of Czech culture and its people, one of the country's most infamous and hilarious news reports made its way into the game. You can find this reference in the bailiff's book in Troskowitz. It mentions a 57-year-old woman named Zdena, who remains wedged between a tree root for 11 hours due to her reluctance to call for help.
Zdeno! Zdeno!
North of Raborš, you'll find a lifeless body in an algae-covered pond with its head inside a wicker fish trap. Behind him lies a doused campfire, where a crab still rests on the ashy remnants, and beside it is a bear pelt. From these things we can conclude that this man was likely either a hunter or a fisherman. Further along the path, a small cave reveals a dead man's skeleton draped in spider webs. When you piece all these details together, this feels like a nod to Czech and broader Slavic legends of the Vodnik, a water spirit who turns the tables on those who dare exploit ponds and rivers, often disguising themselves as something green. The folks at Warhorse Studios seem to have a fondness for the Extraterrestrials. Just like in the first game, there's a crashed UFO near the edge of the map, but this time they've gone one step further and included aliens themselves. On the opposite side of the map, you'll find their mummified bodies in a grave-like box, a direct reference to the viral footage of aliens released by Mexico. This isn't the last of the strange and the occult in the game. On the southeastern border of the Trotsky region, you'll come across an abandoned tent where you can actually spend the night without someone barging in. Nearby, there's a bloodied opening in a small tree and the beak of what looks like a wooden duck peeking out. All of this leads to a mysterious, leafless tree shrouded in an eerie mist. Tied to the tree is a skeleton, likely the victim of a ritualistic death, and then next to it is a peculiar stone. Interestingly, you can find a similar tree in the Kuttenberg region. That one, though, is accessible. It's decorated with bizarre totems hanging from its branches and a basket full of offerings. And let's not forget the stones with strange faces scattered around. These might be a nod to pagan rituals that were common during that time, or perhaps a teaser for an upcoming DLC. And speaking of things that were all too common in medieval times, witches. Near one of the charcoal burner camps in the Trotsky region, you'll come across remnants of various magical beings, like a Harry Potter-esque skeleton flying on a broomstick, with what looks like a snitch-like object in its mouth, but things take a turn for the dark when you realize that wood isn't the only thing at stake here. This entire scene appears to be a nod to the grim historical practice of executing those accused of witchcraft by tying them to a stake and setting them on fire. In a house around this corner of Kuttenberg, you might spot a strange figure peeking through the window. It's not entirely clear whether the devs added this just for the creep factor or as a reference to something more specific. Could it be a nod to the monolithic human figures carved by the Rapa Nui people on Easter Island? Or perhaps it's a playful reference to Angelo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Either way, it's a cool little mystery to ponder as you explore. Let's turn the page to something a bit more joyful. Picture a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs scenario, but with a twist. A timeline where Snow White actually took a bite of the poisoned apple, the Wicked Witch met her end at the stake, and as for the dwarfs, well, they probably got eaten by wolves. At least this is what the game version implies. Fun fact, if you try to eat the apple found near Snow White, it's spiked with lullaby potion. East of Kuttenberg, you'll come across a picnic spot featuring a mermaid skeleton, and it died holding a pitchfork. Or the devs didn't have enough time to add a trident, which could be a nod to King Triton from The Little Mermaid. Nearby, you'll also find a chest full of strange coins. Seems like the humans stole its treasure, but the whole situation ended badly, as there's also a dead boar nearby, and a bunch of empty cups and abandoned picnic stuff, suggesting that something fishy, literally and figuratively, went down here. Remember the little dinos the devs hid away in multiple cutscenes of the game? You can actually find them in a cave near Kuttenberg. You will need to pick a very difficult lock if you want to catch a peek. Inside this abandoned place, you will find an underground tunnel, where the dinos can be found at one of the dead ends, and besides them is a body marked by their claws. The Apothecary in Kuttenberg seems to be hiding a bloody dark secret. If you enter through the first door next to the stairs in his shop, you'll find a tunnel that leads to what looks like a dead vampire with bloodstains visible on his mouth, a crucifix lying on his body, and garlic clusters hanging above him. There is also a dead woman lying nearby. Unfortunately, neither the apothecary nor anyone around his shop seems to know anything about the vampire, leaving this mystery unsolved. However, there's a very missable path leading up to the attic from the kitchen, where you'll find a book detailing how to create some rather evil talismans. And near a table full of used materials is a book sitting on a chair containing a lot of mysterious symbolism. The apothecary clearly isn't as innocent as he seems. You can also discover a body similar to the vampire in the crypts of Sedlet's monastery.
What's this? His corpse must have been lying here for several decades, but it looks like he died yesterday. God, our Heavenly Father, have mercy.
And while the whole crypt is filled with the remains of the dead, that body is mysteriously preserved. You can access this area through a side quest or, if you're feeling lucky, by some expert lockpicking. At the southern edge of the map in Trotsky, you'll come across a house that seems to be floating in midair. It's out of bounds, so it might be a bug, or perhaps a sneaky reference to Baba Yaga's house. In Slavic folklore, Baba Yaga's hut is a log cabin that sits atop giant chicken legs, so this floating house might just be a playful nod to that imagery. Although the game is set in the 14th century, the devs have managed to sneak in a few references to present-day life. For example, there's a cutscene during a side quest where you can spot an airplane flying in the background. Then, if you head to the forest north of Trotsky Castle, you'll find a gym with equipment that looks surprisingly modern. But my favorite reference is the hidden room in Kuttenberg. Inside, you'll find a small team of cartographers, or rather, what's left of them. This seems to be a nod to the handful of developers who originally started working on Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 before the team expanded during production. Remember the road cone Easter egg from KCD 1? It popped up in some unexpected places, like a hunter's tower. Well, the devs couldn't resist sneaking in another cone reference in KCD 2. During the gameplay showcase, you can spot it in Henry's equipment. Small actions can have big consequences in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. You can even end your journey early by committing enough crimes to get sent to the gallows or failing to save Hans from the same fate during one of the main quests. But there are more interesting ways to abruptly end your playthrough. Spoiler warning for those who haven't yet reached the King's Gambit questline. During this mission, you'll infiltrate a council meeting led by Sigismund. If you manage to find a dagger and stealthily kill him, you'll trigger a game over screen with a special message. But not all endings lead to a noble death. If you're trying to make gunpowder on your alchemy bench while being drunk out of your mind, you'll trigger another sudden game over screen. Honorable mentions include a Starday's dagger found within Sedlet's monastery. Outside the walls of Kuttenberg, you'll come across a dummy wearing a bucket for head protection, affectionately known as the Protector of Kuttenberg. Nearby, a miniature house is hidden along the walls. Before wrapping up, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone whose contributions made this video possible. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe for more content.